To the left, we have the LG C2. To the right, we have the Samsung QN90B. I want to show you guys the massive shifts in cyan that exist on the Samsung QN90B versus the LG C2. Essentially, the skin tones in things like anime, like One Punch Man here, look way better on the Samsung, but almost every other color falls apart by comparison. Just look at the sliding glass door in the background, the sky in the background, the wall in the background. All of it has more natural, more realistic expressions of cyan than what you're going to get with the Samsung. Now, even if you decide to professionally calibrate this up, you're still not going to be able to get around this. Samsung, unfortunately, with their color management system, don't allow you to have the kind of creative control to be able to fix those kinds of things through the hues. All you have is an RGB mixer, more or less, which just means that you're trying to use red, green, and blue channels instead of hue, saturation, and luminance to, again, correct color. It's a very backwards way of doing this, and it doesn't work. It has been this way for years, and I think the only TV that control really worked on is the Samsung KS8000 from 2016, which we will be doing a comparison of, so stay tuned for that. If you look carefully in this scene, you'll notice that there is substantial blooming around the eyeballs on the Samsung QN90B. In a normal, well-lit room, it's like an average daylight scene here, and you can totally see a ton of blooming. Of course, OLED doesn't have that. Another thing you'll notice is that the saturation of the Samsung is just overly done. If you look in the center, there'll be a little purple daisy-looking flower. It's not supposed to be that saturated, but on Samsung, it just is. The theme with Samsung is oversaturate everything to compensate for the lack of picture quality. And I think that's the problem here with Samsung. Instead of targeting accuracy to some degree, making sure colors aren't just one flat purple, actually giving you all the in-between shades like LG is giving you, you're just kind of stuck with one thing. And that is going to be something that's annoying. More annoying, though, is that blooming around the eyeballs. You can see it around this character right over here. You can see it around the eyeballs here, all this glowing. That is something I'm actually picking up with my naked eye, and I'm sitting directly in front of this television, the Samsung QN90B, and it just does not look good. Now, if we look at motion of spinning helicopter propellers, you can clearly see that intersecting geometry is still worse on the LG C2 by comparison. But again, this is something that we kind of already know about the C2. It doesn't do good with motion in that aspect. However, it's pretty bad by comparison, and you can clearly see it. So as you want to figure out what would be better for faster paced motion, the Samsung QN90B is still going to edge out LG when we're talking about fast moving action scenes. Now, due to space limitations, I do have to start hand holding it at this part to kind of show it on my actual camera, so just kind of bear with that. But I do want to show you guys something, okay? So if you look at the Samsung to the right, it does tend in some instances to have oversaturation when using native, as you can clearly see here. Now, if you'd like to correct this, you can always go to auto, but auto does tend to throw away a ton of color. Now, you don't have to take my word for it. You can always try that out and see how much you'll lose compared to the LG C1, and then you'll kind of realize that it's just the bland, generic, washed out Rec 709. And if we hit play here, you guys can kind of see what that will end up meaning across multiple scenes and scenarios. I mean, it's not going to look the best. Now, I don't know what YouTube's going to show you, but things that should be certain colors end up having more of a puke green hue to them, and it doesn't look very appealing. Especially things like yellow, they start having more of a green effect. I don't know if you can see that as Aloy is climbing on these rocks. The yellow is just completely destroyed at this point, and that's one of the negative sides. So if you use native, that gets corrected, and then it's the proper yellow versus the pukey washed out yellow. I mean, you can clearly see the effect switching on camera from native to auto to native. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So unfortunately, you either have to pick between terrible saturation and more or less inaccurate color that's one solid saturated blob of nonsense. It's really sucky because their custom color space doesn't do a whole lot. So yeah, still something that is a negative. Now, to the credit of the LG C2, I always want to call it the C1, the LG C2 is doing an exceptional job at just showing so much crazy color and detail compared to what Samsung is offering. And honestly, if I walked in the room, I would think that the quantum dot television is the LG C2. That's how much color it's capable of putting out versus what the Samsung is capable of this year. So LG has absolutely surpassed what Samsung's flagship quantum dot television can produce for color this year. And if that's something that you wanted to hear, well, now you heard it here. Now, the thing to keep in mind, though, Samsung targets oversaturation, which means they find primary colors and they make them ultra vibrant, but they're not giving you the proper expressions of those colors, if that makes sense. This scene in Ratchet and Clank is one of my favorites to use to kind of show what I'm talking about. If you look carefully, you can see the C2 to the left is just kicking out a ton of color. And there are just so many instances where the Samsung shows what should be dynamic color as just a solid shade of color. If you look at the background in this instance, it's very clear. Like, it's just kind of like a purplish blue, but it's not showing every in-between color. Like, honestly, dude, if you were here in person, you would be blown away by just how much more dynamic the LG C2 is. Now, again, there is no way to show the proper white balance divided up across, half segments of the comparison here. So unfortunately, the camera is metering for, or in English, okay, the camera is pulling white balance for the generic scene here, which is two TVs. And because they're two different panels, you're not going to see what I'm talking about. But again, let me just say, there is a absolute difference here that is worth noting, and it's just unbelievable to see the level of color coming off of an LG OLED. By comparison to Samsung, who is known for being a saturation monster, LG is dominating them to a massive degree. It's genuinely surprising because when Samsung went up against LG for many years, it used to be like LG is just the most washed out representation of color by comparison. Their reds were off. Like, it's like they took all those feedbacks or all that criticism and all that feedback to heart, and they just literally just fixed it. And honestly, this is where it starts getting really exciting, because now we have essentially LG hitting at a quantum dot level. We are confirming that right here against the flagship Samsung QN90B. It's absolutely spanking this thing in color. Like, my eye is more drawn to the LG. Now, Samsung has the better highlights, which does have its own merits and its own effect for sure, but that's not the whole story here. If we look at this scene, we can kind of see more of what I'm talking about with clarity coming out of the LG C2. It is just scary how much clarity comes out of the thing. Now again, Samsung has nice highlights, but LG is also doing their thing, and frankly, if I had to pick a TV that looks better and is consistently a more heavy-hitting experience, it is the LG C2. Even though the Samsung has better motion, it's still something that you really honestly aren't going to notice until you get to the fastest paced scenes. And I think an argument can be made that the LG C2, with the rest of its overall performance outweighing Samsung to such a massive degree, is worth considering. Now, all that being said, if I had to pick a winner between the LG C2 and the Samsung QN90B, I'd say it's the LG C2 by a country mile. I'm just saying, dude, like, the level of, like, laziness coming out of Samsung is massive. This is like a blooming mess, and there's so much that goes wrong with this TV where LG isn't having that problem. Samsung relies too heavily on peak highlights and oversaturation to sell a lot of people, and to their credit, it is an effective tactic that has worked for years. But as we go forward into the future, with these kinds of TVs already existing on the market right now today for a whole hell of a lot less money than the $2,000+ it cost me for just this 55-inch, then one can clearly see that Samsung is actually under-delivering compared to what our expectations are from this technology today. And with the amount of blooming and all that other stuff, forget about it. So, that being said, it's a win for the LG C2, and that's just as real as anyone's going to tell you. I mean, gosh, look at all the blooming in this warehouse scene. This is kind of what I'm talking about. I mean, oh my gosh, it's horrible right now. Dude, if you're in a movie and this starts happening, that's just total trash. Like, you didn't even have to do much to see all that blooming that just kicked up there. Like, that's just insane. But all right, guys, I think you get the idea. At this point, it's the strong picking on the weak. The LG is just destroying Samsung at this point, and it's just not fair. It's not just because of black levels, like I said, it's the overall picture quality and what they're actually performing at. Jeez, that's terrible. I'm sorry. I'm like watching this and I'm still taken back by how horrible this blooming is. I can't believe this is a $2,000 TV. What a rip. But anyway, that's the comparison. If you have questions, leave them in the comments down below. Next up, we're going to be comparing Samsung against Samsung to kind of level out that playing field a little bit more for them in their favor. Spoiler alert, they're probably still going to get baked. But until the next video, I'll see you guys later.